Another huge storm will be coming to the United States today and tomorrow, and this is going to bring even more severe weather to areas like the Great Plains, the Midwest, and perhaps eventually into the Ohio Valley, where more damaging winds, large to very large hail, and a few tornadoes will all be possibilities. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about the severe weather threat for the next few days. We're going to begin with what's happening, though, right across the United States right now, which there's actually some pretty interesting things that have been happening over the last 24 hours. We did have a pretty eventful day yesterday, anywhere from the Ohio Valley and even back into the southern plains, all the way back into the Northeast, where there were a few tornadoes, damaging winds that were pretty numerous to widespread at times, and in addition to that, some large hail did mix in there. But overall, that system is trickling off to the east. The only remaining activity today for severe weather with this disturbance will be across the Carolinas, where some isolated wind and hail will be possible. Pretty ordinary springtime thunderstorms there. Back over in the southern plains, we have had some showers and thunderstorms that have been circling around a little high pressure system back over in parts of Texas, and this activity will eventually kind of dwindle down as we go throughout the day today, and this will all lead to a ton of moisture surging across areas in the northern plains, and this will eventually lead to a severe weather threat across a large chunk of the northern and central plains, and even back through the Rocky Mountains today, where large to very large hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes are all going to be possibilities. Now, you'll notice right off the bat, today's risk is a very large area, and it's also an enhanced risk for severe weather, which is something we've not seen too much recently. We had one a few days ago that didn't really pan out across Wisconsin, but today's, I think, will pan out. We do have a large enhanced risk anywhere from Montana and North Dakota back into South Dakota and Nebraska, where the greatest concentration and also the greatest confidence is for severe storms. We do have a slight risk of severe weather that goes all the way back into Oklahoma. There's even a little area of Utah and even western Colorado that could see some severe weather later today, as this high pressure system will continue to circle storms across anywhere from southwest to northeast, leading to that severe weather risk in the northern and central plains. We could also see a localized area of severe weather later today in Kansas and Oklahoma. We'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Now, you might be wondering, what are the main concerns for today? Well, one of the greatest threats will be damaging winds that could be significant at times. We could see some storms produce damaging winds as high as 80 miles per hour in this hatched area, which goes from northwestern Nebraska back into parts of Montana and as well as North and South Dakota. In addition to this, we'll have a potential for some large to very large hail out of any storms that develop today that are more discrete in nature. So anywhere from central Montana back into North Dakota and also back through Nebraska is where we could see some hailstones that exceed 3 inches in diameter at times. The tornado risk for today is going to be primarily centered anywhere from North Dakota and Montana all the way back into parts of Kansas and Nebraska. But really, I would say the greatest concentration for this threat will be in eastern Montana and western parts of North Dakota, and maybe another little centered area back over in northwestern Nebraska and southwestern parts of South Dakota. Now, also notice we have a small 2% tornado risk over in parts of northeastern Utah, northwestern Colorado, and southern Wyoming. We could also see an isolated tornado over in that area. Now, once we go into Friday, which we'll talk more about Thursday in a second, but once we go into Friday for Flying Fences Friday, we have another large risk for severe weather, which will start to move more to the east. Another large slight risk anywhere from parts of Colorado back into Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and as well as northern Kansas. Marginal threat outside of that, where the potential for severe weather will exist again. We'll have a potential for significant damaging winds in parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and also back into northeastern parts of Colorado, where the greatest concern for damaging winds upwards of 80 miles per hour will exist. We also could see some significant hail back over in parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and even northeastern Colorado once again, where the potential for upwards of 3-inch diameter hail will exist. The tornado risk for tomorrow is going to be a bit more conditional, but it is in another large area. It's a 2% anywhere from southern Minnesota back into Kansas and Nebraska. That means there's a very low chance of a tornado, but obviously stay weather aware and have a tornado action plan in place. Slightly more elevated back over around Kansas City, but that is again a little bit more conditional for tomorrow, and we'll talk about more on why in just a second. Now, today's severe weather setup is a little bit different from ones that we've been dealing with recently. Though there's a more elevated tornado risk, the overall hodographs are not very impressive. And what I mean by this is that it basically shows us the winds throughout the atmosphere, from the surface all the way up into the upper atmosphere. And we're not going to have a whole lot of spin in the atmosphere today. We'll have some localized areas of maybe some more spin as we go from the surface all the way up to the very top of the atmosphere, which is near the tropopause. But really, overall, it's not a very impressive setup. Usually you're looking for a very curved hodogram photograph something like this, and we're not really seeing that anywhere. What's going to probably compensate for that, though, today in terms of the tornado risk will be the instability near the surface. We are going to have a lot of instability, so a very unstable atmosphere. We should also have a discrete mode for severe weather, meaning discrete supercells are going to be a very strong possibility, which means that any storms that develop will have a better shot at producing tornadoes if they are discrete. Now, here's what the timing looks like for today. We're going to begin with Montana, Idaho, and northern Wyoming first. Then we'll go back over into the northern plains and central plains. So storms will try to fire off right around 12 to 1 o'clock Mountain Time, anywhere just northwest of Billings. These will predominantly be wind, but I wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado with this activity. By around 3 to 4 o'clock, these storms continue to move towards Miles City and eventually going towards North Dakota. Overall, today's threat in Montana will be a daytime threat from about 12 until 6. The threat over in the northern plains a little bit different. We'll have some sporadic showers this morning. That should stabilize the atmosphere out to the east, so that should eventually allow for this afternoon and evening's threat to be a bit more linear and not nearly as severe for those over in eastern North Dakota and eastern South Dakota. Nonetheless, storms will fire off right around about 4 to 5 o'clock in both North Dakota, South Dakota, and as well as Nebraska, where any storms that become discrete will produce the potential for very large hail, damaging winds, and the potential for a tornado. By the time we get closer to about 5 to 6 o'clock, we are likely going to continue to see at least 1 or 2 discrete supercells in both South Dakota and back into North Dakota. Now, in this particular instance, we could see these cluster together a bit earlier than forecasted, and if that happens, this will transition more into a wind concern by around 6 to 7 o'clock tonight. But I do think we have a chance for tornadoes between 4 and about 8 o'clock in both North and South Dakota, as long as storms do stay discrete. Wouldn't rule out an isolated tornado after that, but I think this will become more of a mesoscale convective system once we get closer to sunset and just after sunset. Now, back over in Nebraska, we could still have some discrete supercell activity down there that produces the potential for a tornado, or it could just upscale more into a mesoscale convective system, leading to more of a wind concern. Overnight, we could still have a couple of storms out there, but majority of the severe weather will wind down probably about after 10 o'clock tonight in those areas. Central Plains, a little bit different today. We'll have some storm activity trying to fire up in Oklahoma this afternoon. Main concern, damaging winds and some isolated hail. By this afternoon, storms will fire up in western Kansas and again in Nebraska. These should upscale again into mesoscale convective systems with more of a wind concern. I don't anticipate much of a tornado risk unless, again, we see some sort of discrete supercellular activity. If we don't see that, it's probably going to be more of a QLCS tornado risk, which means more isolated, brief and weak tornadoes embedded in a line of storms. Once we go into tomorrow morning, things start to clear out. We'll have a lot of rain and a lot of showers and storms still out there in Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska, which will lead to tomorrow's severe weather risk for Friday across parts of the Central Plains, where the tornado parameter values right now are a bit higher back over in areas in eastern Kansas, northwestern Missouri, and also into southwestern Iowa, where a conditional risk for tornadoes is going to be something to watch for tomorrow. So what does this look like on the future radar? Well, as I mentioned before, showers will trickle in throughout the morning on Friday. Eventually, as we go into the afternoon hours, that shower and activity will continue to move east, and it will probably stabilize the atmosphere for the majority of the afternoon. But if that stable atmosphere can be overcome, we could get an isolated discrete cell or two back over in northeastern Kansas or even into northwestern Missouri. But it is going to be highly conditional on what happens tonight and also into tomorrow morning. Overall, a isolated tornado or two are possible, but I would not be super concerned about it right now. Just stay weather aware at the bare minimum for both Friday evening, and that'll be really the main time to watch for it then. And then back over in Nebraska and also western Kansas, we'll probably end up seeing a mesoscale convective system develop here. This should eventually move eastbound across Nebraska and Kansas, posing mostly a wind threat as we go throughout the evening. So be weather aware if you're in those areas. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, as we will probably be live today and possibly even tomorrow.